Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we are unpacking an absolute masterclass in social innovation from Dr. Kortney Ziegler called The Changemaker's Guide. What we're really exploring here is a blueprint. It's a guide for transforming technology from a force that, constantly extracts from communities into a restorative engine that actually repairs them. If you've ever looked at a completely broken system and wondered how you could possibly use tech to dismantle it and build something better, well, you are definitely in the right place.
Right off the bat, Dr. Ziegler's core philosophy is summed up in this one very powerful idea. We don't seek out seats at broken tables, we build new ones. And this isn't just some catchy startup slogan, right? It's a worldview that was born from his own personal evolution. Growing up in 1980s Compton, California, he saw firsthand exactly how a community cares for its own. He saw mutual aid and unconditional love thriving despite just massive, overwhelming systemic struggles. As a black transgender man, he had to apply that exact same radical advocacy to himself. He literally had to build his identity from the ground up in a world that really wasn't designed for his existence. He realized that if he didn't start building a different kind of future, nobody else was going to do it for him. It's honestly amazing how massive, systemic interventions can begin with the smallest possible actions. Back in 2017, Dr. Ziegler sent out a single tweet to his followers, just casually floating an idea. He asked, "What if there was an app that simply converted your daily spare change into bail money to free Black Americans?" The response? An immediate electric yes. That one single digital spark completely ignited the creation of Appolition, which was a platform that eventually went on to raise over $1 million and physically free hundreds of people. So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We are going to walk through the 3 core life cycles of a social impact startup. We'll start with the spark of a movement, then move right into Cycle 1, break, Cycle 2, rebuild, and Cycle 3, sustain. And finally, we will wrap the whole thing up by busting the binaries that hold so many founders back. All right, Part 1, the spark of a movement. For Dr. Ziegler, the real catalyst for this work came from confronting what he viewed as the incredibly vicious nature of the cash bail system, a system where freedom basically depends on wealth rather than guilt. That brings us to Cycle 1, break. Because before you can even think about building a new solution, you have to figure out exactly where to shatter a harmful system's momentum. To figure out how to do that, Dr. Ziegler developed something called the cycle mapping canvas. It's basically a 4-step diagnostic tool. Let's look at how we applied this directly to the cash bail system. Step 1 is deconstructing the harmful cycle itself. You really have to trace the human cost. Take the deeply tragic story of Khalif Browder, a 16-year-old kid who spent 3 agonizing years in jail for allegedly stealing a backpack, and it was simply because his family couldn't afford bail. You map out how that one negative event cascades into job loss, housing instability, and total despair. Then, Step 2 identifies the systemic drivers. In this context, the canvas pinpointed the criminalization of poverty and a for-profit bail industry. Step 3 is all about uncovering the biases, mapping how this system overwhelmingly targets Black, brown, and low-income individuals. And finally, Step 4 pinpoints the exact breakpoint. For Appolition, that strategic breakpoint was the precise moment of bail payment. They designed a tech intervention to automatically pool spare change and just pay that bail, stopping that irreversible cascade of harm dead in its tracks.
But look, breaking systems is incredibly complicated. Despite Appolition being a massive success, Dr. Ziegler actually made the incredibly painful decision to sunset the platform. You might be wondering, why on earth would he do that? Well, when the pandemic hit, almost all of their spare change roundups started coming from one single company, Amazon. At that exact same time, Amazon was facing intense public scrutiny over its technological contracts with ICE. So, Dr. Ziegler had this brutal realization. His mechanism of liberation had become operationally dependent on a corporation that his community viewed as expanding the carceral state. The profound takeaway for him was this: the ethics of your supply chain matter just as much as your mission. You absolutely cannot just audit what your tech does, you have to audit where its resources are coming from.
So, how exactly do you protect your mission from those kinds of compromises? You use the trust-based tech checklist. This is basically the exact opposite of that old extractive Silicon Valley maxim, move fast and break things. Instead, you are building resistance architecture. You practice radical transparency by just defaulting to openness. You uphold privacy and dignity by practicing radical data minimization. You implement robust data security, not just as a feature, but as a physical manifestation of your integrity. You have to embrace accountability, constantly communicate your mission, Actually listen to community feedback, prioritize ethical harm reduction in your design, and make sure the tech is universally accessible. In this model, trust isn't just a happy byproduct. Trust is the actual product.
Moving right along to cycle 2, rebuild. Because once you actually clear away a broken system, what comes next? You're basically staring at a blank slate.
Dr. Ziegler noticed that traditional emergency aid systems generally force vulnerable people into what he calls the interest trap. They demand financial interest, think of predatory payday loans, or they demand social interest, meaning they force people to publicly perform their poverty and trauma on crowdfunding sites just to get a little bit of help. To counter this, he built Well Money. This platform was designed to deliver rapid, unconditional financial stability through anonymous, no-strings-attached gifts. It is structurally engineered to be incapable of exploiting its users. It preserves their dignity and completely eliminates debt from the equation.
To actually engineer something like this, he used the debt-free product canvas. Step 1, you map the debt trap and define what users literally need to thrive, without any of the hidden costs. Step 2, you define your debt-free value proposition. Basically, what are you offering that liberates people instead of exploiting them? Step 3 requires building a truly non-exploitative operating model. For Well Money, that meant implementing a sliding scale membership instead of those predatory convenience fees. Step 4 is designing a dignity-centered user experience. It should feel like a digital sanctuary. And Step 5, this is crucial. You measure true impact. You track actual human well-being and justice, like user-reported relief, instead of just, counting clicks, daily active users, or dollars extracted.
And the results of designing for dignity are just staggering. Reading through the anonymous gratitude notes from Well Money users, you can feel the genuine relief. Because the platform didn't force anyone into a public performance of their trauma, 98% of recipients willingly shared an anonymous thank you. But here is the absolute most powerful behavioral metric. Over 90% of the people who received help voluntarily chose to increase their own monthly contributions shortly after. To put that into perspective, 9 out of 10 people decided to give more after being helped. That proves a vital thesis. When you foster radical dignity and trust, users don't take advantage of you. Instead, you inevitably harvest their generosity. The care actually circulates instead of just being consumed.
Okay, now for cycle 3, sustain. You've built this amazing regenerative engine. Now you have to figure out how to make it endure and scale. When Dr. Ziegler tried to scale Well Money, he hit a massive structural wall with traditional venture capitalists, including elite accelerators like Y Combinator. In his view, VCs were entirely focused on a model of extraction. They wanted quick, massive financial returns that were essentially based on user debt, and that simply didn't compute with Well Money's core logic of generosity. So, instead of compromising the entire mission, Dr. Ziegler pivoted. He stopped chasing misaligned capital and found aligned funding. He did this through a fiscal sponsorship and by working with Camelback Ventures, which is an incubator specifically focused on founders of color who are building social impact solutions.
To navigate scaling responsibly, he developed the Participatory Roadmap Framework. Think of this as the complete opposite of the Silicon Valley growth at all costs mentality. It has 5 phases. 1, discovery. This means deep, active listening to the community. 2, definition. This is where you set your ethical guardrails. You decide not just how you will grow, but what you absolutely refuse to sacrifice. 3, ideation. You co-design the pathways with the community. 4, planning. Here, you prioritize based on social return on investment, not just traditional financial ROI. And 5, implementation through completely transparent communication. The absolute golden rule here is that every single strategic expansion decision has to pass through the filter of community consent before it ever becomes operational.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, busting the binaries. Because sometimes the most rigid constraints on social impact aren't out there in the world, they're internal.
Dr. Ziegler argues that we are culturally conditioned to think in these really restrictive either-or binaries. We think you either have to build a for-profit unicorn that extracts wealth, or you have to run a nonprofit charity that is constantly begging for grants. He challenges founders to embrace expansive both-and opportunities. For example, he registered Appolition as a public benefit corporation, or PBC. It's this brilliant hybrid legal structure that formally encodes your social mission right into the corporate bylaws. So it legally prioritizes people over profit, but it still gives you the institutional legitimacy you need to scale up and challenge entrenched systems. You really don't have to choose between a sustainable business model and a social mission. You can structurally engineer both.
So we've walked through exactly how to break harmful cycles, how to rebuild with radical dignity, and how to sustain your impact alongside your community. Dr. Ziegler's frameworks absolutely prove that technology doesn't have to be extractive. True innovation is repair. And it all really comes back to one single vital choice. Are you going to settle for a seat at a broken table, or are you ready to break the cycle? What new table will you build? Let that sit with you for a bit. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer, and we will see you next time.